Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, June 2nd, 2022, and we are here at the Transportation Commission, and we're all joined virtually. My name is Bridget Obikoya, and I am the Transportation Commission Staff Liaison. This meeting is being recorded, so I please ask that you turn down your mics when you are not speaking. Before we start with the agenda items, we do have a citizen comment on matters not on the agenda by Mr. William Callery. And Mr. Callery, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, may I start now?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Callery, and I'm here to hit on the much discussed topic, the temporary roundabout at Military and North Custis Drive. The project website references many summary level numbers like average speed, average yield rate, things of that nature. To support project transparency, I'd like to see the detailed source data that was used to generate the summary level numbers on the website. Elements like date, day, time, vehicle direction, miles per hour, things of that nature. The data has to be available because that's how we calculated the average speed in the first place, right? So I think this data in general for any project should be fully available as a drill down from the project website. This supports project transparency and accountability. It also lends context where it may be otherwise absent. And the data should support both the reason for the project and serve as a measure of success after the project's complete. Further examples of the detailed data that I'd like to see include crash and accident data for this site, as well as comparable sites at other arterial intersections of the county, just to get a comparative idea of whether this intersection is particularly problematic. Pedestrian and crosswalk data. How many PEDs do we have? When are they crossing? What's the issue we're trying to address? Is it kids going to school at 8:30 and coming home at 3:30? Is that the primary concern? I already mentioned mile per hour data and yield data, just the details behind that. Data such as day of the week, date, time, speed, and the in and out direction of the vehicle. And what I mean by that, is it just coming up Nellie Custis and continuing on Military, or is there an actual, what used to be a turn involved? Another example of something that I'd like to see some detail on would be there are multiple references to the 85th percentile speed for Military Road. Military Road's in the 85th percentile. Well, 95% of the roads in Arlington, I surmise, have a speed limit of 25 miles an hour. So it's not unusual if you have a speed limit of 30 that it's going to be in the 85th percentile. So the detailed data would lend some context to that. And I could go on with other data items or project observations, but I'm probably running close to my time limit. I'd like to see the data. If you want to email it,
10 seconds.
Email it to me, that's fine. Otherwise, put it on the website, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. One last shout out, Bridget, you were great in being responsive to my emails all week, so thank you very much. And as long as you're on the phone, I might as well call you.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. I do have a point of clarification, though. It was just pointed out to me that while your item was not technically on the agenda tonight, it is a part of the CIP. So before we go forward, though, I'd like to see if there are any other comments on matters not on the agenda. Hearing none, I want to turn the meeting over to Chairman Slatt to take it further.
Great, thank you, Ms. Obikoya, and thank you, Mr. Callery, for your comment. We are largely a policy body that advises the board and not involved in this sort of level of detail. But I am confident Ms. Obikoya will chase down the project manager and get you the data that you're looking for as we move forward. I will say, as a point of clarification, 85th percentile speed is the speed that the 85th percentile person on that particular road is going. So if the 85th percentile speed on Military is above 30, which I believe is the issue, it has nothing to do with speed limits on other roads. 85th percentile is just looking at Military. We are now a Vision Zero county, and so any crashes with a death or serious injury is too many. So while I'm sure we can get you the crash data, and my recollection is that this is a particularly problematic intersection, if there are any, then it's time to see what we can do to make some improvements. So with that said, I have nothing else other than the agenda. So let's go ahead and jump into it, Ms. Obukoya.
Okay, the first agenda item is the transportation portion of the capital improvement plan with Sarah Crawford, who is the Assistant Director of Transportation. Hi, Sarah.
Great. Hey, how are you? Thanks
Well,
for having me this evening. I have quite a lengthy presentation to give to you all tonight. It is a draft of what we will be using for the board work session, which is on June 7th, next week, Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And just for other dates of import for the CIP, the CIP public hearing will be in the evening of June 28th. That's a Thursday. I believe, actually it's a Tuesday, correct me, it's a Tuesday. And then the board will take up adoption of the CIP at its July meeting. It's not determined yet whether that will be the Saturday meeting or the Tuesday meeting. So with that, I will pull up the presentation. I will go off video to conserve bandwidth. I do have a quick question about how much time, Chair Slot, would you like to limit my presentation?
We've got a pretty light agenda other than you tonight, so
so the full version?
You can give the full version,
Okay.
Because I think we probably only got 20 minutes of stuff after you.
Okay, well, I feel bad. I'm keeping those 20 minutes worth of folks around while we go through this, but so be it. We'll do it. Okay, so as I said, I'm going off video, I'm going in full screen mode, and to that end, I can't see hands, so if something seems to go off the rails, please do interrupt me. Just shout into the presentation and I'll pause for a minute. As I said, this is draft. We have been almost building the bicycle as we're riding it in terms of pulling this presentation together in fairly short order from the proposed CIP. So it is hot off the press. Some things may change prior to the work session on Tuesday, but I believe we're working with a pretty comprehensive draft here. So to start out with, this proposed transportation CIP advances a number of different county goals. Broadly speaking, these goals are in addition to those goals and objectives found in the Master Transportation Plan. Various projects throughout this program seek to minimize or reduce impervious surface, as well as incorporate street trees, native plantings, and other elements of biophilia in the right-of-way. The capital program has supported numerous goals in the community energy plan for decades through ensuring transit investment supports our development and in constructing multimodal facilities over the decades to support movement around the county without cars. This CIP continues that tradition and is also responsive to CEP goals, namely through investment in electrification of the ART operation and maintenance facility. The projects in the capital program continue commitments to provide transportation infrastructure and service to our neighborhoods with equity in mind. While it's not a stated goal in the CIP, racial equity is a factor that staff uses as a filter when we're considering new projects. And finally, the CIP continues to advance Vision Zero. This is the goal that, as you mentioned earlier, Chair Slatt, the goal of having zero serious injuries or fatalities on our transportation network. Safety has always been at the forefront of our Complete Streets program, but we're now able to better analyze hazards and quantify potential improvements more methodically. So I'll go over some highlights and key takeaways from what is both an immense document and what will be an immense presentation. This CIP continues funding for various projects and programs that we have been working on with the community through design and implementation for years. We also have a continued commitment to Vision Zero that's embedded throughout the CIP and in every project that we will discuss. Pardon me. And then due to the immense portfolio, we'll continue to pursue partnerships with external agencies and development partners to assist us in implementing our program through design and construction of projects. PAYGO and bond funding is anticipated in the program simply to maintain state of good repair and bridge rehabilitation. The CIP is also responsive to the board guidance from the FY 2022 adopted CIP, and will also outline on a subsequent slide a strategic approach that we have to federal grant opportunities. So in numbers, the proposed CIP looks like this. It's an immense program, as I mentioned. In total, we have $1.4 billion of investments spread roughly between our Complete Streets program and our transit program. Those are the largest programs, which contain numerous sub-projects and programs within them. You can see the projected spend on this slide. We also have a line item for maintenance capital, which ensures that we're making improvements to that infrastructure and sets of technology that are already in our right-of-way. We also fund actually close to about several dozen staff in our transportation capital portfolio that's under program administration. And we pay for a decent amount of art service through TCF as well. This also includes operations and maintenance for capital bike share. I do want to draw your attention to this line item towards the bottom of the slide. It's called an implementation adjustment. One of the factors that we'll also address in various slides throughout the presentation is that construction and even design can be messy. We can find things when we are designing a project, whether through doing additional test pits or through working through difficult, tight situations where we'll need easements or run into other obstructions, or when we're in construction, that we discover things we hadn't anticipated, which can delay a project. Additionally, we also face contracting constraints with bids that may come over what we had anticipated in the CIP. This has happened on several projects. And so what we've done is layered on an adjustment, which we're calling an implementation adjustment, that strips out some funding from the CIP with anticipation that we're over programming on that total submitted CIP line item, but that we likely will not implement to that level, just given these externalities. This allows us to move forward more projects and hit those snags, yet continue working on more projects than we otherwise would without that adjustment. Oh dear, here we go. So this is a snapshot of the CIP, both by program and by funding source. So on the left of the slide, you have that $1.4 billion divided by program. As I mentioned, the majority of it is for Complete Streets and Transit, and then the other set of categories that I mentioned. And if we shift over to funding source, we'll see that about a quarter of the program is from existing funding. That's whether we are under agreement for various external grants or we have that funding, quote unquote, in the bank. The other 75% or so are new sources that we anticipate receiving, whether through submitting grant applications or through tax revenues or bonds. Bonds you see at 9%, and tax revenues come from a variety of sources. TCF is the Transportation Capital Fund, and it's comprised of two different sources that are dedicated to transportation: the commercial and industrial tax that's collected from commercial properties, and the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority local portion of that funding source, which is predominantly an additional increment of the regional sales tax. We also have the Tax Increment Finance District in Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard. It's a mouthful. As well as, you'll note, PAYGO. Regional funding is comprised of several sources: Northern Virginia Transportation Authority regional funds, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission Commuter Choice Program. I wanted to highlight the bond referendum that will be going forward for approval this fall. The major takeaway is it's about 50% lower than what was anticipated in the 2022 adopted CIP. Some of the reasons for that are that we did receive alternative funding for our bridge maintenance and rehabilitation program to the tune of about $16 million in federal funding for Arlington Ridge, Mount Vernon Bridge. We also reduced the paving ask for 2024 just due to the fact that we've caught up on a lot of that maintenance and we're really benefited by several light winters where our streets did not degrade as quickly as they might if we were to have a more harsh winter. So as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at a number of different federal funding opportunities. There are so many in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is wonderful. However, one of the things that we've learned over the years in looking at federal funding opportunities is that we have to find programs that really do fit our community size and our transportation network composition. So we have to look at balancing the goal of leveraging those external funds with the additional cost and time to administer projects with federal funds, as well as the best likelihood of success in which we believe that these programs on the slide are well matched to our transportation portfolio. Most applications require extensive detail and consultant support to develop a benefit cost analysis that's responsive to the application requirements. And there's often a low rate of success, unfortunately, and this is demonstrated by that kind of grayed outline on the bottom. We were not successful in attaining that Road to Zero grant. But we do feel optimistic about our prospects. We've submitted for the second time to the RAISE program, the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. We had a debrief with US DOT and received favorable feedback as well as a couple of pointers of where we could improve our application. So we responded to those improvements and we're crossing our fingers that we'll have a favorable response to that project. I will note for the Safe Streets and Roads for All, that is a new program. The Notice of Funding Opportunity just came out last month, and we are combing it to make sure that any project we might identify would be as responsive as possible. I think we're well positioned with Vision Zero, but as I was alluding to, there are so many different considerations that are different for each of these funding programs. So if we're not able to identify that right fit project in 23, we'll submit in 24. So that's why there's kind of those grayed out X's in those columns. We'll submit in one of those years. We are assuming this will be a repetitive program year over year, much like RAISE has been. Similarly, we've also highlighted the Reconnecting Communities program, which is a retrofit of separated roadways with an eye on submitting the Fort Myer Drive tunnel removal. Again, we'll need to learn from the Notice of Funding Opportunity if that really is a good fit. And there's two options that we believe would be viable for our transit program, the Low No Emission program for bus replacement or expansion, and the All Stations Accessibility program, which would support funding for Courthouse Metro Rail Station second elevator. So we wanted to highlight the CIP mapping tool for a moment. I am not going to do a demonstration because that would drag this presentation into hours because I'm not technologically savvy. Essentially, the CIP mapping tool is something you can find on the county's website. It's been developed for all departments. This map simply shows what the transportation filter would look like. And you can click on each of those icons to get more information about the status of a particular improvement. And if the improvement or project has a web presence, you'll be directed to that website. So it's a really useful tool to dig into more information about some of the sub-projects or sub-programs of some of the programs we'll go into greater detail. So this map represents projects in the Transportation CIP related to the goal of achieving racial equity. The map shows several different metrics, Title VI areas, and TPB equity emphasis areas. As a recipient of federal funding per Title VI, we're required to show how use of those funds does not discriminate based on color, race, or national origin, as well as how our projects serve areas with higher concentrations of lower income households. The Transportation Planning Board, or TPB, is the region's federally designated metropolitan planning organization, and they developed an equity emphasis area as a lens through which localities can inform future investment decisions. The methodology and population basis for these metrics was developed regionally, and it includes areas with higher concentration of lower income individuals and racial or ethnic minorities. So therefore, the thresholds for these equity emphasis areas are determined based on regional income levels and minority populations, whereas those for the Title VI areas use Arlington population and income levels as a baseline. So that's where you'll see that overlap and you'll see the differentiation is because the sort of base metrics are different. But essentially, the purpose of the map is to show that the transportation portfolio, or rather the transportation portfolio, was not historically developed with racial equity in mind. Racial equity is not actually included in the master transportation plan. It is informative, however, using this tool to view our program through this lens, as it does show that our commitment to fulfilling infrastructure and service along areas with these populations along Columbia Pike, for instance. The CIP also includes funding for design and implementation of projects along Shirlington Road and 4 Mile Run Drive. But it is clear from the map that we do have further study to conduct that will inform future investments in areas with higher concentrations of racial minorities or lower income households. Some of the studies that we'll discuss tonight on subsequent slides will begin to progress on that work, but there are still areas that will require additional study. We did want to highlight some of our recent achievements. We are really excited about that photo in the top corner. It's the groundbreaking for the Crystal City Potomac Yard Transitway extension to Pentagon City and the associated 12th Street Complete Street project. We also have projects or pictures on the screen in the lower right. The rightmost is the sidewalk on 18th Street and Pentagon City. And then construction is beginning on the West Glebe Bridge, which is really great since it did have to close due to additional deterioration. The listed projects are those that have recently started construction or will begin soon. And then the last project on the slide, the Army-Navy Drive Complete Street, is slated to go to the board for approval in June, which is incredibly exciting. So I wanted to take a step back for a minute and just give an overview of how we ended up with the transportation network that we have today and how the Transportation CIP continues to advance those goals in our community. So this environment came from years of planning for development and associated transportation projects. These are all grounded in that pivotal decision to route Metro Rail under one of the main commercial corridors of the county with higher density development adjacent to Metro Rail stations. So just to orient folks a little bit, Rosslyn is on the left side of your screen here in the 1972 vision, and again on the left side of the picture on the right in the 2022 version. So it was actually taken a couple days ago, which is kind of cool. A little hazy, but of course that's summer/spring in Arlington. Ballston, you'll see down here at the forefront or the foreground of the picture on the left, and similarly, this is Ballston on the right and the other picture. There were no metro stations in 1972. As you can see, there's also really not a lot of density or that pronounced development that we have today. And what you'll see today is that transit-oriented development surrounding our Metro Rail stations, walkable within about half mile, 3/4 of a mile to some of the Metro Rail stations. And so this has been transformational for congestion, for environmental sustainable travel options, and for multimodal accessibility for all incomes. But of course, we're still improving and we're evolving, and capital investments that are outlined in the CIP will continue making such improvements. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about how the growth pattern we just reviewed has had an impact on people's behaviors. Annual vehicle miles traveled for all roads has trended downward during the last decade, including on VDOT's primaries, as well as vehicle miles traveled per capita for Arlington residents. That's the line graph on the left. The graph on the right shows that daily traffic on our major arterials has generally decreased since 1996. The pandemic has impacted travel patterns in such a big way that we've not felt that recent traffic data serve a useful example in comparison to the historic counts. We have been tracking traffic on our arterials since the pandemic, and we are seeing reduced traffic from pre-pandemic times on most arterials. However, Arlington Boulevard does seem to have almost fully rebounded to pre-pandemic traffic levels. We're also seeing a slower recovery in transit ridership. We're very invested in making sure that our transit system is successful, and there have been recent increases in ridership on Metro Rail and bus. And so part of this shift, which we'll also see into the future, is that a lot of Arlington households are carless. They're car free or they're car light. And so both of these charts demonstrate the impact of providing that interconnected multimodal transportation network, and the associated smart growth leads to a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, and by association, a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is important given that transportation within Arlington and pass-through transportation contribute to about 36% of Arlington's total greenhouse gas emissions. Shifting to the next slide, we've seen a change in Arlington's choice of mode of transportation over a 10-year period. The Transportation Planning Board conducts a regional travel study every 10 years. These two charts on the slide show the data from 2007-2008, and then on the right, 2017 to 2018. So Arlington residents, which are represented in the blue bars on the screen, drive less now than they did 10 years prior, both alone or with others. This is a distinct trend from the regional average, which has single occupant vehicle trips increasing to 60% of mode choice in 2017 and 2018, with carpooling and walking sharing a significant decrease for regional travelers. Strikingly, Arlington residents walk about 8% more by mode choice in 2017-18 than they did 10 years prior. It represents a significant shift in behavior. We've been recognized as a gold level walk-friendly community by the Walk Friendly Communities program, and we think part of that is due to the fact that people are walking more because of that associated infrastructure that we've been providing over the last several decades. The historic investments made by Arlington and those programmed in the CIP will continue those improvements not only for pedestrians, but bicyclists and transit users. Pardon me. Now we're getting to the meat of the presentation. As I move through the next dozen or so slides, you'll note that there's some discrete projects and there's some larger programs. The interactive CIP map, which I referenced, will allow you to kind of dig in a little bit more to some of those programs. And there's also links in the CIP document in each program that provide links to the web presence for active projects. So the projects listed throughout the presentation include cost figures that represent the level of spend in the CIP. For projects in construction, the figures will look a little bit baffling. For instance, Boundary Channel Drive is listed as $3 million, but we've paid most of that funding to VDOT to begin their design construction project, so that's already been spent, which would not be accounted for in the numbers in this presentation. For some projects that are pre-concept, the figures represent, at this point in time, our best level planning estimate, and they may change in subsequent CIPs. Finally, we've included in the CIP, or in this presentation and the CIP, the fiscal year in which we expect project completion. Similar to cost, this is much more certain for those projects that are under construction or about to go to construction, but they are our best estimate for those projects that are still pre-concept. And I think it's good to reference back to that implementation adjustment on the funding slide that we've overlaid over the whole program. That allows us to account for the uncertainties that I've kind of mentioned, you'll see reflected just because of that unforeseen impact of construction and then design. So we have some wiggle room built in, but in certain cases, substantive shifts are not really out of the question. Really, we would not have them, but that's construction. So now, shifting onto our transit program, we began with the ART Operations and Maintenance Facility. Construction will begin this summer on the new ART facility, which is, we're just incredibly excited. This will ground the ART fleet in Arlington, allowing for much more efficient operations and maintenance, and that facility is anticipated to be complete in 2025. In a change from the last CIP, we've assumed and we've built in costs for conversion to solar energy, as well as charging infrastructure for a transition of the ART fleet to battery electric buses. The infrastructure that we're installing in this construction of the O&M facility will allow for charging for 16 battery electric buses. The phase 2 project on the right side of the slide assumes installation of the additional charging infrastructure that will be necessary as we advance further in that transition from clean natural gas to electric, and we'll install additional charging capabilities likely in fiscal 26 or 27. The projects and the costs reflected on this slide they assume that full conversion as buses are being replaced or as new buses are purchased. But there are some unknowns at this point. We are in the midst of two, what I'll just call studies. One is a pilot, one is a study. We have the zero emission bus study, which looks at bringing buses to zero emissions. However, we are currently anticipating that to be battery electric buses. A final decision will be made pending completion of that study, which is anticipated this December. And we are working with multiple vendors to pilot electric buses on our ART route, which will be important just to see how these types of buses perform in Arlington, which is a fairly hilly jurisdiction, but you know, we'll find out, it's kind of an exciting pilot project. And as noted on the previous slide, costs may change in the next CIP once we conclude the study efforts and get a better understanding and a better handle on how electrifying the ART fleet will really impact either the physical infrastructure and performance of the fleet. But we did want to highlight a couple of things that we're thinking of at this time. So at this time, it appears that technology associated with battery electric buses will require us to purchase more battery electric buses at a higher ratio in order to maintain the level of transit service we're providing now, since at this point in technology, there are range limitations on the batteries. To that end, we may need to implement creative charging infrastructure, potentially in the right-of-way, and that's not factored into the costs that are in the presentation or in the CIP. And we have to really think about various options in order to continue focus on our core mission of providing that safe and reliable transit service. The additional component of our ART fleet is, of course, the buses. This slide focuses on bus replacement and purchase of buses to expand transit service. The replacement program on the left provides funding to replace aging buses in the ART fleet. We currently have 78 buses. This program accounts for higher costs of battery electric buses, as well as the current need to purchase more battery electric buses due to the range limitations. So for instance, in the next purchase, we'll be purchasing 30 battery electric buses to replace 15 aging CNG buses to ensure that we can maintain the same level of service. However, we made the assumption that technology will continue to improve for battery electric buses, and that in the future, replacement of buses would be made at a 1-to-1 replacement ratio. We also plan to expand the ART fleet. That's the portion on the right. This means that we'll purchase buses to add on to the fleet to increase the ART fleet, to increase service rather, so that we can expand service per guidance in our transit development plan. We assume these purchases also to be battery electric buses and have assumed future technology will allow those battery electric buses to provide that same level of service that we now see for CNG buses. But of course, as the evolution of technology and what we learn from these studies, this may change when the next CIP comes along. And speaking of buses, we'll shift to talk about bus operational improvements that we're making throughout the county. We're increasing the bus to rail transfer capacity at the East Falls Church Metro Rail Station. We're adding 3 new bus bays. The project will be in design in 2023 and in construction in 2024. And just for reference, the projected design support agreement with Metro will be on the county board agenda for approval in June. We received funding from the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission's I-66 Commuter Choice Program to implement a bus-only HOV lane during peak periods on Langston Boulevard between Veach and Lynn Street. This will be implemented in 2023. And the graphic on the slide shows a possible pavement treatment. The image is from Northmore Street in Rosslyn. Finally, the CIP includes funding for the Shirlington bus station in fiscal 28 to 30. This is in anticipation of increased future demand, necessitating additional bus bays at that station. The Crystal City Potomac Yard Transitway, as I mentioned earlier on that groundbreaking slide, is under construction, which is incredibly exciting. There's several projects to complete the transitway. As I'd mentioned, we have the extension to Pentagon City. The first segment is under construction along with that 12th Street component. The second segment is currently in design and will be moving to construction towards the end of 2023 and concluding in 2025. For the extension of the transitway to Alexandria, we anticipate design to begin this coming fiscal year with construction to complete in fiscal 2025. On this slide, we'll review the transit program projects that expand access to Metro rail stations. The Ballston West entrance is adding a second station at North Vermont Street and Fairfax Drive. It's intended to wrap up 35% design by the end of the year. We're working closely with WMATA to ensure that our design meets their station specifications. The project will include elevators and stairs to improve accessibility from points west in Ballston, as well as safety and ADA improvements to improve safety and egress at the station. The project will be complete in 2027. At this point, we have 2 pending grant applications, one to MBTA for $80 million and one to MBTC to total to $85 million. We're awaiting the outcome of those funding requests. And for a point of reference, the project has about $32 million of local funding in the form of the Transportation Capital Fund. The Crystal City East entrance will add an entrance to the station at Crystal Drive and 18th Street South, which will provide a more direct connection to the Crystal City VRE station. 30% design will be completed in the fall, with construction anticipated to begin the next fiscal year and complete in 2025-26. The project leverages a considerable amount of state funding provided as part of the Commonwealth's commitment to Amazon. I mentioned earlier, as part of the federal funding package, the Courthouse Metro Rail elevator will replace 1 aging elevator with 2 higher speed elevators. This will improve ADA access to the station exponentially. We anticipate beginning construction in 2026, assuming we secure that federal funding. And finally, we anticipate beginning planning and scoping work on the East Falls Church Metro Rail second entrance, west entrance, in the later years of the CIP. This project was contemplated in the East Falls Church area plan and subsequent planning work that was performed by WMATA. And now we shift to our Complete Streets portfolio. So as I noted, there are numerous projects in many of the Complete Streets program, and we highlight some of them in this presentation. Within several programs, including Bike Arlington, we have a placeholder of projects, or it's not of projects yet, but it's a placeholder funding line to ensure that we do have funding available in the mid to late years of the CIP. And the intent of that is to ensure that we have funding when needed to be able to implement recommendations that may emerge from some of the planning studies that we'll review on subsequent slides, as well as for Vision Zero safety audits that demonstrate a need for significant capital commitment. So therefore, we are using the slides in this presentation to highlight some of those efforts, as well as some of the studies that are yet to come. So first and foremost, the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail, which I mentioned, we submitted a RAISE grant. This will provide connectivity from Memorial Drive to Columbia Pike at Joy Street, which will really provide a major connection between Rosslyn and Pentagon City, Crystal City, and of course to DC through Memorial Bridge. So this will be a really great project for connectivity of the trail network. The CIP also includes multiple phases of the Arlington Boulevard Trail, which will help fill gaps in that facility. The CIP completes the portion from Edison to Grenada in the next several years, and we'll have federal funding in FY28, it's CMAQ funding for the portion between Edison and George Mason. These will be coordinated with a study that I'll get to in just a moment. We're also continuing funding for expansion of Capital Bike Share with added funding for e-bikes. Moving down the line, we have a program within Walk Arlington that focuses on spot improvements throughout the county to improve pedestrian access. These spot improvements often take the shape of fairly small projects, missing links on sidewalks, completing additional gaps within the sidewalk network, or adding curb ramps. Specific locations and projects are identified through county staff observation, C3 feedback, or the Vision Zero safety audits. So it's a pretty iterative program that allows for us to be able to be fairly nimble in addressing some issues within the pedestrian network. We have included a project here to build out the temporary striped sidewalk that was installed through the Vision Zero program on Lorckham Lane as well. Another example of how we're trying to make room in the capital program to implement some of the tactical treatments that have been put in the right of way by the Vision Zero team to ensure that there are safe facilities for people to walk and bike in other areas. And finally, we've included funding for a variety of studies. I've highlighted those that we'll be bringing forward in the near term. And as I mentioned, we have capacity to continue studies sort of year over year. As we wrap up one, we can begin another. The Arlington Boulevard Trail is a study that came about from the previous CIP process, and we'll study that really challenging gap between about George Mason and North Jackson Street. The WNOD Trail Gap continues work that was funded by the TPB TLC study to figure out a way to bridge that gap on the WNOD Trail where you have to cross North Sycamore Street at street level. And then finally, we have a study to determine feasibility of renovating and improving the Custis Trail, which is one of the primary commuter trail corridors in the county. One thing to note also on some of those sort of placeholder capacity line items in various programs. One in particular in Bike Arlington does anticipate regional funding, likely in the form of MVTC commuter choice. Just given that I-60 or that the Custis Trail is immediately adjacent to I-66, we think a capacity enhancement project, should that be the recommendation, would be a very good candidate for that regional funding. Moving on to Columbia Pike, the board recently awarded the construction contract for segments F and A, and construction will begin imminently. These are from South Wakefield to South Oakland, bounding George Mason Drive, and then a small portion of segment A is just east of Columbia Pike. I suppose I could use my cursor. So here, and then the segment here with George Mason Drive centering that. By the end of this year, we anticipate bringing contract approval to the board for segments C and D, and those are kind of in the middle, or I guess slightly east in the middle. We anticipate wrapping up construction on all segments by 2026. We have received the first shipment of components for the first 8 transit stations, and initial prep work is underway, which is just so exciting for that project. The 8 stations will be installed by the end of summer, and the remaining stations, which you can see dotted on this map here on the left, those will be installed as site work is complete on the multimodal project. So the transit stations associated with the multimodal project will be installed as that project wraps up in those areas. And finally, we're funding implementation of the Metrobus 16M service on Columbia Pike, which will provide a 1-seat ride from Skyline to Crystal City. This will begin in 2023. Okay, moving on to Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard. There are many projects highlighted in the CIP document, and we're just showcasing 3 here. The Each Street bicycle and pedestrian improvements is being implemented in phases and coordinated with adjacent development. Phases 1 and 2 will complete a protected bike lane on the east side from Army Navy Drive down to 15th Street. We do have contemplated in the CIP a subsequent phase 3 later in the mid to late years, which would be timed with redevelopment between 15th Street and 23rd Street South. So we're well within the NEPA environmental assessment process being conducted for the CC to DCA multimodal connector. This is an important first step to realize this project, as the project will impact the George Washington Memorial Parkway. So we're working closely with NPS, National Park Service, other federal agencies, VDOT, Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and Virginia Railway Express, to ensure that the facility will be both beneficial to users, but also respectful of the historic nature of the national park, which you can really see in this sort of darkish, what would be green, if this were in full color, in this set of pictures. So we anticipate there will be another public engagement opportunity this fall on a preferred alternative. What you see here are several alternatives and different alignments and facility types represented. An exercise that must be gone through for an environmental assessment to determine that all alignments and facility types were considered meet the purpose and need, and those that don't will be screened out. So we're in that process of screening out alternatives that aren't in keeping with the purpose and need. The NEPA process and the project are funded by a combination of local, federal, and regional dollars. The final cost, as with that sort of caveat that I made earlier, will be determined following initial design and the selection of a preferred alternative. Then shifting to the final project on this slide, we've recently added to the project webpage revisions of the 90% design plans for the complete street at 15th Street South between Route 1 and Crystal Drive, as well as the realignment of Clark Bell Street. This will also include a dedicated trail from 12th Street to 18th Street, which is part of a larger effort to improve bike access in Pentagon City and Crystal City. The project will begin construction in 23 and complete in 25, and it's funded with a mix of local and regional dollars. Turning to one of our larger, more varied programs, improvements outside major corridors. One of the highest crash locations in the county is at the merge of the ramps at Arlington Boulevard and Washington Boulevard interchange. So we're working to develop a concept that will greatly improve safety at this location, as well as improve accessibility for all modes, and particularly the crossing of the Arlington Boulevard Trail. We are submitting a smart scale application for state funding, and if successful, anticipate beginning construction in 2025. We will begin engagement on various concepts within the next fiscal year. We have included funding to build out some of the recent traffic reconfiguration that was recently installed on 4 Mile Run Drive. We also plan to begin design on streetscape improvements on Shirlington Road, which is adjacent to the Operations and Maintenance Facility, and extending north to the John Robinson Jr. Town Square in Green Valley, which was previously called Knock. The project will implement various streetscape goals that were outlined in the 2004 Knock Village Center Action Plan. We had a recent engagement, as we heard earlier in the meeting, on the performance of a pilot roundabout at Military Road in Nellie Custis. So staff will continue to review data collected from that pilot, and I'll ask staff to review comments provided at the beginning of the meeting and respond to those data requests, so that we can be sure we're all looking at the same data and analyzing to really ensure that the recommended project will improve safety at this intersection. There are a variety of alternatives, including implementing a permanent roundabout or a traffic signal. We have yet to complete our analysis on the pilot in order to be able to make an informed recommendation on that, but we will do so with engagement once we've completed analysis of the pilot roundabout. So just based on all of that and that additional engagement, we anticipate the project to be complete by 2026. We're advancing design on 2 coordinated complete streets projects on North Sycamore Street at the intersection of 19th Street, and then the corridor moving north to Langston Boulevard. Construction is anticipated to be complete in 2025. The CIP also continues to make improvements along Pershing Drive at various intersections between North Barton, where we installed temporary treatments, to North Nelson Street. We'll be working in phases at various intersections and will be designed and constructed through fiscal 2027. Moving along, we are closely coordinating the Walter Reed Drive improvements between 6th Street South and Columbia Pike with both the APS Career Center project as well as our own Columbia Pike multimodal project. The Walter Reed project will improve pedestrian and bike access as well as redesign the intersection at 9th Street. Another high crash location in the county is at the intersection of South and West Glebe. This project will improve sightlines and pedestrian crossings. As we referenced earlier, the West Glebe Bridge is now closed for construction, and this project will enter design shortly and ideally be ready to follow the bridge reconstruction. And finally, as I mentioned on Bike Arlington, we do have several studies on the horizon and improvements outside major corridor. Active now is our South George Mason Drive study. And in fiscal 23, we will begin a feasibility study of an over or underpass at the 4 Mile Run Trail crossing at Shirlington Bridge. And finally, we anticipate bringing forward in fiscal 24 a study of the Carlin Springs corridor, and then follow that with an associated feasibility analysis of trail connectivity adjacent to Kenmore Middle School. our Neighborhood Complete Streets program. We're excited that the board will take up action later this month, approving several additional projects that will move forward as part of the Neighborhood Complete Streets program. In partnership with the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission, we are really excited to bring forward 4 additional projects. Through this program, the Commission reviews locations throughout Arlington using a set of specific guidelines to rank locations that are in need of safety and accessibility improvements. And then we work with our design engineers to be able to come up with the improvements that are really appropriate for that location. So last year, the board approved advancing a sidewalk on 16th Street South between Highland and Walter Reed. You see the existing conditions in the picture on the left. That's under construction now and is going to be wrapping up within the next couple months, hence the lack of spend in this CIP, but I did want to give that attention. 2 of the other projects that are new are highlighted here. There's a gap in the sidewalk network on South Irving Street in Arlington Heights between 6th and 7th Street South. This project will add a sidewalk, which is really important since this location is in the walk zone of 4 different schools. At North Fairfax Drive near Rocky Run Park, we have a really small project, but it serves to really improve pedestrian safety at these 2 mid-block crossings by providing more visibility both for pedestrians and for drivers. Shifting to the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor, there are many improvements that have been made to the streetscape over the last several decades. We saw that in that drone slide that we showed earlier. Much of Wilson Boulevard streetscape from Ballston to Virginia Square has been rebuilt, with a final segment between Kenmore and 10th Street moving forward in the next couple of years. This corridor has been incredibly challenging due to the constrained right-of-way, and this is just another place to highlight why that implementation adjustment and the fact that some of these dates that we've put forward in the CIP can change just due to how challenging it can be to work out some of the temporary and permanent construction easements, as well as coordination with utilities, and another pretty big challenge that we overcome, of course, but it can take time with all of the utilities that we coordinate. We're also advancing design on the intersection of Fairfax Drive and Kirkwood Road. It's another high crash location. It was identified by the Vision Zero program. This project will implement some of the recommendations from the Clarendon Sector Plan update that was recently adopted by the board, and will it strives to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety at that intersection. And then we have a significant amount of design and reconstruction that will begin in Rosslyn. There's only 2 projects that are listed on this slide, but together they comprise about 10 discrete projects. So I guess we not only have projects within programs, sometimes we have projects within projects. The reconstruction and transformation of Rosslyn will be incredibly complex, and it will take about 7 years to really get us to the point where we have a new streetscape that's safe and accessible for all modes. But it will be fantastic. The primary change is the removal of the Fort Myer Drive tunnel under Wilson Boulevard, which will allow us to convert Fort Myer Drive into a 2-way complete street with cycle tracks and widened sidewalks. But in order to do that, we have to sequence a number of different improvements, both prior to and following that major effort to remove that tunnel, and to ensure that this is another utility item, that all of the utilities that are buried well underground are brought to at least a surface level that can allow for access and maintenance. We have about $11 million in MBTA regional funding for this effort, and a recent allocation of $8 million in state funding. And as I mentioned on the funding slide, we do hope to leverage federal funding on this set of projects. So to that end, just based on the complexity I noted, these cost levels may change and the dates may change as we get a better handle on design, which will begin shortly. Now we turn to the central repository for all things Vision Zero. I've mentioned Vision Zero numerous times throughout a number of these projects. We work closely together across teams to take specific location areas or treatment types and ensure that they're woven into the capital projects. But those ideas and that analysis has to come from somewhere, and this is where it comes from, the Street Safety Improvement Program. It's been just over a year since the board adopted the Vision Zero Action Plan, And the Vision Zero program just released the first year report card, which is posted on the website. Of note is the implementation of school slow zones and about 90 field safety improvements. So there's three major components for implementation of Vision Zero findings. The System Studies and Improvements portfolio looks at issues across the county's transportation network and recommends modifications, sometimes piloting certain treatments or overlaying certain treatments across the system in a way to determine the level of impact on safety. Examples of these types of treatments can be found in the Vision Zero toolbox. The Arterial Studies and Improvements funding allows us to conduct safety audits along some of our major corridors and also supports low-cost implementation where feasible. However, for those locations that are in need of major reconfiguration or a significant amount of site work, possibly involving utilities, there is funding for capital improvements. By and large, this funding will be used to advance design on those complex projects and then essentially take that project and drop it into one of the other CIP programs for complete design and implementation. And again, that's sort of references the intent of some of the placeholder funding in a variety of different programs, depending on what type or what location the Vision Zero project may be. We do have some discrete complete streets projects listed in the CIP due to their size or complexity. The Army-Navy Country Club Trail had a recent engagement where we asked for feedback on 2 design options determined to be feasible through an analysis funded in the previous CIP. However, since the last CIP and through that analysis, we've determined it's not feasible to provide access for emergency vehicles within the easement. So this is a trail project now. And the CIP includes funding for the staff recommended option, which is stairs and a runnel. As I mentioned earlier, in June, the board will be asked to approve construction contract for the Army-Navy Drive Complete Street, which will rebuild that street and include a 2-way bicycle facility. It's funded predominantly through a mix of federal and regional funds. And then as part of an alternative delivery strategy, VDOT is carrying forward the design and construction of Boundary Channel Drive, as I mentioned. The total cost is $19 million, but $3 million of which will be spent in this CIP period. We're hoping construction will wrap up by 2024. And finally, I want to highlight a placeholder program for Langston Boulevard multimodal improvements. We've added a mix of state and local funding beginning in fiscal 24 so that we're poised to begin further study and design on recommendations that will come out of the Plan Langston Boulevard initiative. The timing and level of funding will likely be revised as specific projects are identified. So we'll now transition into the portion of the capital program that funds some of our infrastructure and technology that supports safe movements throughout our transportation network by all modes. Our bus stop and shelter program improves ADA access to current bus stops and renovates and replaces existing bus shelters. These assets have a useful life of about 15 years, but repairs can extend that. The ITS, or Intelligent Transportation Systems program, installs technology that will help improve the efficiency of our street network. It's one of the sort of homes in coordination with our transit program for transit signal priority. It allows our engineers to monitor traffic conditions in real time and has funding for backup power at traffic signals in the event of power outages. The parking meter program replaces and repairs almost 1,500 parking meters in the county. The parking technology program will include a new pilot program later this year to study dynamic parking pricing in our commercial corridors. The county owns and maintains almost 8,000 streetlights and is working with Dominion to convert their streetlights to LED technology. We are beginning to upgrade the older generation of LEDs of our own streetlights to newer technology, which will further energy savings. And finally, we have a robust traffic signal program with almost 300 signalized intersections. We rebuild about 8 signals each year. And while the useful life of traffic signals is about 30 years, we perform many repairs to extend the life of each signal as long as is feasible. We look for ways to achieve economies of scale by also rebuilding signals as part of our Complete Streets program or through third-party projects. For instance, the Kirkwood and Fairfax project I mentioned earlier will include a signal rebuild, and that will be funded through that capital project versus the traffic signals program. We like to provide a snapshot of our assets in our right-of-way. It's as noted on the screen. The blue numbers are those that are out there right now, and the green numbers represent the increase from the prior year. So I don't need to read all of this, but I'll pause for a moment where you can take a look at items of interest, and I believe Bridget posted the presentation to the website, so certainly go back for more information there. Shifting to our capital maintenance program, I'd like to focus a little bit on bridge rehabilitation and maintenance. Over the last several years, or over the next several years, pardon me, we will have replaced 2 bridges along 4 Mile Run. Wesley Road Bridge is currently under construction, and Arlington Ridge Mount Vernon Bridge will follow upon its completion. So once both of those structures are finished, this will bring our bridge condition index up to 6.5, which it's good. It's in that satisfactory to good rating. That index was only 5.9 in 2016, so this will have a pretty big impact. And upon completion of these 2 bridges, all bridges in the county will be rated at a 6 or higher. So we'll be in a really good place once we finish the construction on these bridges. The CIP also includes a new program that will proactively provide maintenance to sidewalk infrastructure. This is informed by the 2022 Sidewalk Condition Survey and will begin in the coming fiscal year for 2023 with a blitz on tripping hazards, which are those kind of edges that stick up when a concrete joint meets. We'll also begin then zone maintenance in 2024, which follows our paving zones, and then move methodically through zones on 10-year intervals. And in keeping with the evolving state of practice, we'll look to pilot low carbon concrete installations just to see what new technologies or I guess treatments that we can use within this program. The CIP does include a request for a construction manager for this program. And shifting on to paving, we're really glad to highlight that the recent resident satisfaction surveys showed a big increase in resident satisfaction on the maintenance of county streets. The county has invested a significant amount of money over the years, as you can see in the blue line on the graph, to improve the condition of our streets, which was fairly low back in the 2000-2015 range. So we're now at a level of pavement condition index, or PCI, that is considered good. So the level of funding anticipated in the CIP, as I mentioned on the bond slide, is relatively flat. We do have some room to levelize just because we've made such progress over the last couple of years. However, a continued flat level of funding may put pressure on our ability to maintain good PCI over time. So that is something that will need to be accounted for in subsequent CIPs. And finally, I thank you all for bearing with me. We are now on the summary slide. Implementation of transportation capital projects revolves around trade-offs in the right-of-way. Arlington is a small jurisdiction with limited space and competing priorities for use of the right-of-way, and there are layers of guidance from important county priorities. We have to develop a methodical approach to identify improvements that continue that decades-long approach of providing a comprehensive transportation network that complements our development and facilitates travel by all modes, specifically those that provide protection and safety for our most vulnerable users and have a minimally negative impact to our environment. We face an uncertain future with fluctuating costs of construction and inflation, demand on contractors, supply chain issues, costs of materials. And so one of the strategies in handling that and trying to shift the burden, I guess, to others is the need to continue to leverage those additional partnerships to ensure that we move this program forward through creative delivery methods, whether it's working with our private development community or our agency partners such as VDOT. We have several initiatives that look to leverage evolving technology to improve access to transportation options. We will be implementing a mobility hub pilot, which will provide information in the right-of-way, which directs users to non-auto modes. And then we have the strategic plan coming up. It's an update to the Transit Development Plan, which now is called the Transit Strategic Plan, and this will be completed in FY 2023 and will inform those service and facility needs for Arlington Transit to ensure that we're still able to meet our core mission of providing safe and reliable transit service. And finally, we need to direct future plans and studies to areas of the county most in need of improvement based on our collective values. Throughout the presentation, I reviewed study efforts we will undertake to improve multimodal connections in the right-of-way. We do not have a comprehensive view of needs countywide or the factors that are inherently needed to discuss trade-offs with various priorities, whether it's modal priorities or priorities in a variety of different policies. And so we haven't had that conversation yet, but I think it will be necessary in order to inform how we program future CIPs in keeping with things that are important to members of our community. And with that, I am going to stop presenting and take a sip of water. But before I do that, I did also want to mention that I'm joined by our Director of Transportation, Dennis Leach, and we would be happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was an excellent presentation, just like last year, which is extremely useful, given that the PDFs, of the CIP are a little light on detail, though the new map does have some interesting and useful detail as well, which is fantastic. So commissioners, go ahead and throw your hands up if you have questions for staff, Ms. Crawford or Mr. Leach. I think everybody can see them now that Ms. Crawford has stopped presenting. And I will just kick things off with, I think, the question that I ask every year, which is, are we confident that we are continuing to meet the maintenance of effort requirements of our transportation funding that comes from the state? The enabling legislation that launched the transportation, state funding says we can't let this new funding supplant what we were previously spending. My quick back of the envelope math from the 10-year CIP 10 years ago leaves me somewhat concerned. It seems like the amount of GEO bond and PAYGO funding that we're spending has dropped in this 10-year CIP versus a 10-year CIP 10 years ago, which makes me afraid that we're going to open ourselves up to losing some of that state funding. So I would love to hear your take on that particular question.
I'm so glad for this question because staff puts a lot of effort every year into completing paperwork to certify that we are meeting that. And I'm so glad someone's interested in this. The short answer is yes, and I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but we have our contribution to Metro to thank for that. That is part of our transportation package, although it is sort of separately listed in the CIP, and that increasing amount of money that the Arlington County spends on Metro, which I believe is near $80 million, allows us to ensure that we do meet that maintenance of effort requirement. Dennis, did I get that number right?
Yes, and the reason our GEO bond capacity is so constrained in terms of the programs that Sarah shared with you this evening is most of the transportation GEO bond capacity goes to Metro to fund our share. And Metro is a very big line item in the county's overall capital and operating budgets.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Locker, go ahead.
I actually had a question about this line item, the implementation adjustment. And I was just wondering if this is in addition to each project's, I forget what it's called now. There's usually a little bit of I'm forgetting
the inflation that we add on in every year.
No,
contingency.
Contingency, that's exactly right. So is this just a pot of money that can be used across any of the projects that are listed? I'm just wondering if this is more of like a slush fund where if one project needs a little bit more, that it could come from there.
It's actually the opposite of a slush fund. It's almost the absence of money. So I'll back up and I'll explain that, and then I'll get to the contingency item. What we do with the implementation factor is, if you look at that slide, we've over-programmed the CIP to the tune of about $1.7 billion. We don't have $1.7 billion, and we don't anticipate having it. So we've trimmed the CIP spend by this artificial factor of this inflation adjustment to get us to the point where we're balanced. We do that so that we can advance more projects, knowing that we're going to hit some issues. Even though we've accounted for contingency, we bake contingency into every project, but no matter how well you dot your I's and cross your T's, you're going to hit a snag, and this allows us to keep advancing and implementing while still trying to be responsible fiscally. Dennis, did you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would say is that we found our capital funds manager and her team have done a really rigorous job at looking at the implementation of projects, the spending of projects, and when you try to line up the funding at one-to-one with projects and their timelines, it leads to consistent underspending. So I think the whole team came up and felt comfortable with this concept of this programmatic, program level adjustment factor, recognizing that some projects are going to be delayed. And it basically allows us to keep moving the program forward and using all the funds that we have and not letting them sit.
Great, thank you for the clarification.
Awesome. Commissioner Muradovic, you're up next.
Hi, thank you. And I don't know if I'm showing up on camera or if I'm talking from the abyss. It seems like I have a black square. All right. Well, anyway, I had a question about the zero emission buses, the electric buses, and was wondering what type of discussions you might have had in terms of the decision to potentially go through with that. And I asked that because of the concern that whether this might be the best use of money, since buses, by virtue of carrying a lot of people, are some of the most environmental things out there. So, you know, like, I mean, clearly these are awesome. Like, we hope to get them at some point, but perhaps would it be better to focus on increasing frequency or undertaking steps to improve the speed on some of these bus routes, or maybe even accelerating programs already in the CIP? So yeah, I think it was like over $100 million. That was the item for ART fleet. You know, I know a lot of other things go into that, but just wondering about the decision to go zero emission on the buses. Thank you.
I'll take that. This was the subject of a fairly intense discussion at the approval of the 3-year Transportation CIP only 1 year ago. And that we came away with fairly explicit direction from the board. And we are following up on that direction. There are two things that are going to help the county inform its decision making. One is something called the Zero Emission Bus Study. We have a contractor, and it's a partnership between Transportation and the Office of Sustainability, where we are looking at a range of technologies that get us to zero emissions, and that is the goal. We believe that study should be completed by the end of the year. Another bit of guidance that we are actively following up on is to reach out to all of the major manufacturers of zero emission buses and to negotiate pilots in Arlington. That's a partnership between Transportation and Purchasing. That work is underway, and we could have our first pilot bus in Arlington this fall. Our goal is to have 3 or 4 different companies with their vehicles here in Arlington, so we can actually get a really good sense of how they work in this environment in different seasons and on different routes, some that are flat and some that have hills. And all of that will feed into the next bus purchase decision, which will be in early 2023.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moradovic, for asking that question, which was on my list. I appreciate the response. And I will say that I really hope we don't end up in a situation where we are buying 30 buses to replace 15 buses due to range issues with battery electric. And I intend to make that very clear to the board that if we've got money for 30 buses, we should be getting 30 buses worth of frequency and range out of them, not 15 buses worth of frequency and range out of them. I will be interested in seeing the results of the pilot. Commissioner Lantelmi, you're up next.
Well, it turns out that was it. Commissioner Moradovic's question was exactly my question too, and I was going to raise one follow-up that hasn't been touched on. Is there such thing as the bus equivalent of a Prius? By that I mean a hybrid bus that would be battery with a auxiliary internal combustion engine that would extend its range, help recharge it. Do those exist? Would that be something that would make more sense? Because we could then literally do one for one because we wouldn't have the range issues.
So those kind of issues are being teased out both in our discussions with manufacturers as well as through the zero emission bus study. Battery electric buses do have an option for a supplemental diesel heating package. All four manufacturers offer them for buses that are operating in four-season climates. Arlington has not operated anything with diesel in probably over 20 years. We were the first in the region to convert to CNG because of our concern about the environment and particulates.
Well, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with getting rid of the diesel, but is there CNG heaters? You know, it's an excellent question, and it's one I think our consultants are going to push a little more in terms of the industry, and we're going to have those discussions as well. Yeah, because I absolutely join my fellow commissioners in saying the frequency. If we could spend money on frequency, we would get more people on the buses, which mean fewer people in cars, and altogether that's the most environmentally friendly way to do it. So yes, thank you for your responses.
Awesome. Commissioner Ludlow, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. One follow-up. I noticed looking closely through the CIP line items that the new west entrance at Ballston Metro is possibly, I think it's the largest single capital line item on transportation. And I was curious if there were any updates on the county's share, or if that's still to be determined. I'm just curious if you have any new information, because I know that some of the costs on that had been accelerating, and the commission had some discussions about, some concern, in fact, about some of those accelerating costs. So if you have an update on that and how that fits in, that's a really big ticket item. Thank you.
So I can provide an update on funding, and then Dennis can chime in if there's a project update in terms of additional things we've learned through design and coordination with Metro. Regarding funding, we do have 2 outstanding grant applications. We're optimistic, but certainly until any of those entities vote, we won't know for sure. At this point, assuming that we are successful in receiving those grant funding or external funding, the county's portion will be between $30 to $32 million of local funds, and that's commercial and industrial tax, part of our transportation capital fund.
I have a related follow-up question generally, and that is, I believe, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the overall outlook for Metro and the commitment to Metro remains constant. Despite some of the fundamental changes we've seen in ridership during COVID. In fact, some of the completely different structural changes we've seen in transportation demand from COVID. Just wondered if any of that was taken into account, or if the prognosis for Metro, the commitment remains constant because the outlook is very rosy for the future there, despite the struggle that I think we've seen coming back. Now I know that's some of the routes have rebounded well, but overall there's a kind of depressed demand. So I just wondered if that was accounted for, and if you don't know the answer to that question, that's perfectly fine, because I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question, not yet anyway. Thanks.
I'd be happy to provide an initial response, and Sarah, please join in. We look really carefully at Arlington, our development pipeline, what we expect in terms of ongoing infill. The demand for travel is not going down in Arlington, it's going up. And that's particularly true for multifamily housing with very little parking, with relatively low parking ratios. So we are building supply that is essentially walk, bike, transit dependent. So while I think it's going to take a couple of years for Metro to bounce back, the reality is Arlington's development pattern and our trajectory is one that absolutely has to maximize the transit facilities, bus, rail, walking and biking are really important. We do not have the space to accommodate a significant uptick in SOV travel, nor is it environmentally sustainable. So we are probably one of Metro's principal champions because we recognize it's important over the long haul. I would also mention that the Silver Line will be opening to Loudoun and Dulles Airport before the end of the year, making that station at Ballston even more valuable. But it's an excellent question. We've gotten it before, and we've also heard it from our funding partners, and we've been able to provide a very robust answer. We've actually provided development pipeline statistics to our agencies so they can see what is coming. And I have to tell you, we have an awful lot of infill housing in Virginia Square and Ballston.
Thank you very much. That all makes sense.
All right, a couple of detailed questions. Is the airport viaduct bridge improvement project still in this CIP?
I was wondering if you're going to bring that up, Mr. Slatt. I will give the update that I have. Yes, at this moment, funding for that project is in our CIP at a level that I can't remember off the top of my head, that assumes we receive a waiver from VDOT on some of the design exceptions that we've requested on the bridge structure, since we are simply widening the sidewalk and not rebuilding the bridge. Should we not receive a waiver from VDOT, I'm not sure that that project is financially feasible anymore.
And even if you do get the waiver, does staff...
It's programmed in the CIP.
Does staff feel that it still makes sense, given that CC to DCA appears to be moving forward in the near-term horizon?
At this point and in the future, it will provide accessibility to points south. So to that end, it does really provide that pedestrian connection for multiple locations to cross from Crystal City Potomac Yard to the airport. Yeah.
And we think it's still useful even if 2525 Crystal Drive tears down the ramp to Crystal Drive from that bridge?
That is another externality, and we're coordinating with that development partner just to see the future of the ramp, because it is instrumental. You're right.
Is the 12th Street project in Douglas Park connecting Monroe to Glebe Road also still in this CIP?
Yes, that's a bike boulevard project that's part of the Columbia Pike program. And at this point, we've received a good amount of public feedback from the engagement earlier this year. We are revising designs based on that feedback and getting guidance from leadership on moving forward.
All right, cool. Can you talk to me some more about what's involved, what's included in the ITS program? What the heck does this program do?
Well, I will open with funding because that's sort of my bailiwick, and then I will also learn as Dennis tells us a little bit more about the technology because I'm not as well versed in that. We have several grants from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, or they're not grants. We've received funding awards to improve ITS along various corridors in Arlington, which essentially allows us to improve traffic operations for our part to benefit buses and to benefit bus travel and those crossing movements for pedestrians and bikes. But how that actually happens, Dennis, I will hand it over to you.
Great. So it's a multifaceted program. We have now connected all of our signalized intersections with fiber optic cabling. So we have good uninterrupted communications with our signal infrastructure. We have been able to aggressively expand our camera program. So we now have over 300 cameras. We probably have the highest density of cameras in the region. And they are also useful not only for incident management, but they're useful for bus operations. We are also using the ITS program to basically fund the hardware side of transit signal priority. So if we look at Langston Boulevard, Columbia Pike, the hardware side, the non-bus side, comes out of the signal program, not out of transit. The transit, the metro buses are already outfitted with transponders. What will be in the transit program is outfitting our ART buses.
Thank you. That's very useful. Yeah, I can't look at a program like that now has $7 million in NVTA local money programmed for it and not ask questions, because as both of you have told me in the past, NVTA local is some of our most flexible money that we get. I can think of a lot of great uses for $7 million in NVTA local, so I'd like to check in on exactly what we're getting for that money. Great. I think I'm running out of questions, which is great. Rosslyn multimodal, I think is my final question. The timeline listed in the presentation is 2029, 2030. My recollection was that we had like fiscal year 25 money from NVTA regional for not Fort Myer Drive Tunnel, but like a lot of the other projects as far as protected bike lanes, cycle tracks, that sort of thing. Has that timeline slipped because of coordination with everything else happening in Rosslyn, or can you speak more about that?
I can just simply thank you for catching this error in the presentation. As I said, we were still revising up till 5 p.m. today. I think the confusion that we faced in updating the slide is there's two Rosslyn multimodal street improvements tabs in our CIP, one of which has the MVTA funding and is programmed earlier, the second of which is programmed later. The one thing to know, and this is where I need to double check those dates, is that the dates on the slide are completion dates. And so because of the phasing and sequencing, it is possible that one of the, I think, 6 or 7 discrete projects funded by MBTA does lag that long, but it's unlikely. So that I appreciate that nod that I can double check that.
All right, great. Commissioner Ludlow, you've got your hand back up.
Yeah, I may be asking another impossible question here, or an unanswerable question, but I know that the CIP is focused on advancing Vision Zero and car-free Arlington. I wonder to what degree have the potential impacts of missing middle been considered within the CIP, since that's probably one of the policy initiatives that has the most potential to kind of reshape transportation demand in much of the county. If you can't answer that yet, that's fine. I know that the studies are still ongoing at this point. I'm just curious about it. There's a lot of interest among Arlingtonians in this right now. Thank you.
I think I would say that the experience with other communities in the country is that there's incremental change as opposed to 1 year or 2 year transformational change. I actually had this discussion with some civic association presidents in our more suburban portions of the county that were concerned about, oh my gosh, we're going to have all of this density in places that don't have it today. And I gave a reference that a single site plan project in the metro corridors or along Columbia Pike generally has between 300 and 400 housing units on average. It's anticipated probably in the first year out of the gate, depending on what the board adopts, you know, we might see that production or less county-wide. So you look at any civic association, the impact is going to be, from a transportation standpoint, would be extremely modest.
Okay.
And so I think it's something to monitor, and it certainly could play into a future CIP update.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
When I was poking around with the CIP map earlier, the Rosslyn-Ballston Corridor Improvements Program, which of course has a ton of discrete projects in it, pops up a couple of squares for intersections on Glebe Road. I think it's 4th Street North, North Wakefield Street, Glebe and Washington Boulevard. I was wondering if there are in fact planned projects there, or if that is perhaps an error, or maybe that was supposed to be in the ITS program or something.
No, I just figured out the mystery. I had the map open and I was like clicking around as well. So the Rosslyn Multimodal, I'm already forgetting the name of our project. The Rosslyn Multimodal Street Improvements is that set of multimodal street improvements that implements the recommendations from the Rosslyn Sector Plan, Core of Rosslyn. The Rosslyn-Ballston Corridor accessibility improvements are about a dozen or 2 dozen street safety improvements that improve pedestrian crossings, curb ramps, and whatnot throughout the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor. So it's a different project. It's federally funded by Transportation Alternatives.
Okay, so the Rosslyn-Ballston Corridor Improvements is not that overarching program that has a bunch of discrete projects in it. It's a...
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. No, I had it pulled up on the screen, and if I may, I might share my screen and just try to facilitate the conversation a little bit better. I hope I can do this quickly, as I said, and with technology, I'm not sure. Oh, and I can of course move this. So you're talking about the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor improvements?
Yes.
Okay. This is, and I think we are talking about the same thing, and I attempted to derail us. This is a set of locations that was identified through a planning study that we initiated probably 6 or 8 years ago, that is tackling a variety of different hotspots throughout the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor. And there's one location, because the study did stretch down to Buckingham, there's one location and crossing at Glebe that this will improve as well, with kind of a bump outs and curb ramps as well. I can look that study up online and send it to Ms. Obukoya so she can share it with the commission.
Great. I think I'm just confused because it appears to be named exactly the same as the CIP program that has like the Fairfax-Kirkwood intersection, the Fort Myer Drive tunnel removal, and that sort of thing.
Forgive, I turned into a pumpkin at 5 o'clock, so I wasn't thinking clearly. You're right. It's pretty much the same Complete Streets program title for our CIP item.
Okay, great. That makes so much sense then. I understand my confusion. Right. Seeing no other hands from commissioners, and I think I've exhausted my list of questions. I just really appreciate the presentation. It was fantastic. And my understanding is the board work session is next Tuesday.
Tuesday at 3 p.m.
All right. I'll see you then.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dennis. Next on the agenda, we have a vacation of a 1,081 square foot portion of Shirlington Road on the west side of Shirlington Road, adjacent to 2608 Shirlington Road in Arlington. RPC number 31-003-317, and it's an action item.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Maxine Chumley. I am a real estate specialist in the Real Estate Bureau. I'm before you this evening on the application of a developer who is developing a multifamily building at 2608 Shirlington Road. I'm going to share my screen with you. So the developer is going to be developing a multifamily building on this parcel right here. I assume everybody can see my screen. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, the developer is requesting the vacation of 1,081 square feet, which is this little piece outlined in red right here. This 1,081 square feet would come out of a larger parcel that was originally carried on the county's books as a parcel, not as right-of-way. So this larger 17,745 square foot parcel was obtained by the county in 1935. It was an old abandoned railway right-of-way. It was conveyed to the county as a parcel, not as right-of-way. In September of last year, the county dedicated this 17,745 square foot parcel as right-of-way. So it was dedicated for public street and utilities purposes. The developer requested the vacation of the 1,081 square feet, this little piece right here, to add to this parcel, which is 2608 Shirlington Road. And he's going to incorporate the vacated area into his development of this multifamily project on this parcel. The vacation application was reviewed by Transportation Planning in light of the county's right-of-way needs and transportation planning studies. And after considerable review, said that there was no objection to the vacation for the purpose of incorporating the 1,081 square feet into this new development. And so before I move on to the next slide, are there any questions about the background or about what's being requested?
Nope, makes sense.
Okay. All right, so this is the plat, the vacation plat that was presented. And again, the area to be vacated is this highlighted area here. The larger parcel is here. So the Shirlington Road right-of-way extended, well, let me go back. The Shirlington Road right-of-way, of course, is all of this area here. So this portion that was part of the original county parcel, you know, there are driveways in there, there's curb and gutter. The Shirlington right-of-way is a little bit further out. And so the request is that the commission finds that the vacation of the 1,081 square feet portion of Shirlington Road located on the west side of Shirlington Road, adjacent to 2608 Shirlington Road, Arlington, Virginia. RPC, this RPC number is incorrect. The number should be 3103 317. 3017, excuse me, 3103 3017. So the request is that you find that the 1,081 square feet portion of Shirlington Road located on the west side of Shirlington Road adjacent to 2608 Arlington, Virginia, RPC number 3103 3017, with conditions is substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof of Arlington County, Virginia.
Great,
That is
thank
the
you.
request before you.
Do any commissioners have questions? Commissioner Lantelmi, go ahead.
I have just one terribly nerdy question. I think this is fine. I'm going to vote in favor of it. But that abandoned rail right of way, was that a siding or was it for a trolley or something? Do we know?
I don't know. My recollection in looking at the deeds is I don't think anything was ever built in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but that's my recollection.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Moradovic?
Hi, thank you. So with this little plot of land, what will change for the developer other than it'll be more convenient for them to, they'll have more space to, will they be adding more units? Because I don't, or.
Yes, so
Okay.
by adding the square footage, it increases the number of units that he can place in the development.
By how many roughly?
I do not know the answer to that
Yeah,
question.
because it was kind of vague in the report. I'm all for more density. At the same time, I was living on Columbia Pike, where like we don't have space to really build out bike lanes or dedicated bus lanes and everything. I'm a bit hesitant to give away county land, even though it wouldn't be given away. They're going to be paying for it. $67,000, I see. But okay, all right. Thank you.
All right, great. Mr. Lantelmi, I just want you to know I took a quick look at some historical maps and I couldn't figure out what the right of way might have been for either.
Thank you.
All right. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and move that the Transportation Commission find that the vacation of the 1,081 square foot portion of Shirlington Road, located on the west side of Shirlington Road, adjacent to 2608 Shirlington Road, RPC number 31033017, is substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan of Arlington County, Virginia, specifically the Master Transportation Plan.
I'll second it.
Any discussion of the motion? All right, let's go to a vote. Commissioner Brose.
Aye.
Commissioner Nolan.
Aye.
Commissioner Nolan? Oh, yep. Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Locker.
Aye.
Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Moradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Price.
Aye.
Raddick.
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Shannon.
Aye.
And I vote yes. And Commissioner Terry. Oh, I don't see Commissioner Terry. All right. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for the record, I'd like to read the motion just to make sure I have it correct. I have here that you find that the vacation of the 1,081 square foot portion of Shirlington Road on the west side of Shirlington Road, adjacent to 2608 Shirlington Road in Arlington, Virginia, RPC number 31-03-3017, is substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof of Arlington County, Virginia, with conditions. Is that correct?
The dashes in the RPC in my board report are in slightly different locations, but other than that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mine
Okay.
says 31-033-017, but I'm not sure that actually matters.
The number is correct in the report.
Okay.
So it is 3103-3017.
3103-3107. Okay, thank you very
3017.
3017. Okay.
Yes.
So I said it wrong, but I had it here correctly. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Okay, the last item on the agenda is US DOT Safe Streets and Roads for All program, SS4A, and that is with Dan Mulliff, not Richard Rossman, as I previously stated. So welcome, Dan.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here again with all of you. This will be relatively short. I'll do my best. So I'm here to give you a little bit of a preliminary briefing on the SS4A program. That's Safe Streets and Roads for All. This is a new federal grant program through the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Ms. Crawford spoke about it very briefly during her presentation. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about it. A notice of funding opportunity dropped for this just a couple of weeks ago, so we're still in the midst of learning about it. But as we do so, it's looking like a pretty potentially useful source of funding for us, and it's going to be moving pretty fast this summer. So let me just give you some of the basics of the program as we are coming to understand them. This is essentially a federal Vision Zero funding program. It consists of competitive grants for Vision Zero type projects nationwide. So any locality can apply. Nobody is guaranteed. This is competitive money, not formula money. States cannot apply. Localities can only apply for one application per year, per cycle, no multiples. So you have to prioritize yourself. You don't compete against yourself, as some programs work that way. Submissions go directly to US DOT. They're not filtered through state DOTs, as some programs are. So this is, it works a little bit like RAISE or Tiger in the past, but at a different scale and for different types of projects. So in terms of funding amount, there is $1 billion with a B annually for the next 5 years nationwide. It's a lot of money. It's a 80-20 federal local match money, so you do have to put some of it up yourself in order to be eligible. That's fine. And at least 40% of the funding will go to planning work, including what the federal government is calling action plans, which sounds very similar to a Vision Zero plan. With the remaining 60%, could give or take, going towards implementation projects, meaning construction projects or operations of programs. We are expecting at this level of funding, literally hundreds of awards nationwide at a level of probably around 20 million per state. Planning awards will be fairly small. It doesn't take that much money to do an action plan, meaning the implementation awards will be, likely several $1 million each on average, with probably some above 10 million. There is a program maximum. I think it's 30 million per request, but I don't have that note in front of me, so don't quote me on that. We anticipate that it's probably unlikely that any one locality wins an award every cycle, every year, but we think there's actually going to be pretty good odds that at least a couple times over that 5-year cycle, we ought to be able to get one, at least once, hopefully a couple of times. So the first application cycle is coming up fast. Applications are due September 15th of this year. So projects must be completed within 5 years of awards. That gives you some idea of the sort of box around which we can apply for in terms of amount and timeline and readiness, and the speed with which we will have to move. So in terms of process for us, there are 2 possible tracks that you can apply within. 4. You can only do one or the other on any given year. You can either apply for planning money, essentially an action plan, or you can apply for implementation money. So that's construction and operations. If you want to apply for implementation, construction and operations, then you must certify that your existing planning meets the eligibility criteria within the program. If it does, great, apply for construction money or operations money. If it doesn't, then apply for planning money in order to bring your plans into compliance, and then presumably the next year you would apply for implementation. Right now, DES is currently going through this certification process, confirming that our existing Vision Zero plans do establish that eligibility for implementation grants. We expect that they will, but at this stage, we're still going through that process. We can't say definitively quite yet. Assuming that we are indeed eligible for those implementation grants, the question then on everyone's mind will be, what might we apply for? So at this point, we're still very, very much reviewing options, still very, very much in a preliminary stage. But some of the projects that are ID'd in our existing Vision Zero work that seem like they might be good fits, in terms of timeline, dollar amounts, scope, etc., are more work at the Arlington Boulevard, Washington Boulevard interchange. We have, we've been applying for one or two of those ramps to reconfigure them in other programs, you may recall, but the more work is needed. Another possibility is Pershing Drive, Complete Street. Another possibility is some Glebe Road signal and sidewalk work, sort of is in the vicinity of Columbia Pike. And another one is possibly some kind of, large grouped submission with small scale interventions at, lots of high risk intersections throughout the county. We have managed to fund some work in that category already, but there's a lot still to do that this program may be able to reach. So, as I said, we're still reviewing those options. We're still establishing our eligibility for the program. The expectation at this point is that, we believe we probably will be eligible and would apply for one of those, 4 things that I mentioned. Our next steps are, develop our staff recommendation, finish establishing that eligibility. You, the TC, should expect to hear back from us with a request for application endorsement in about a month for the July County Board meeting, since these are then due in September. Today, though, of course, this is just an information item. There's no request for action. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. I would love to take any questions or comments or reactions that you have.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Maloff. No, I don't think I have any questions or immediate reactions in the moment. Other commissioners, if you have questions, thoughts, reactions, just go ahead and throw your hand up. All right, I don't see any. I appreciate the presentation and look forward to seeing what staff comes up with.
My pleasure. I will see you again soon.
All right, thank you. And that ends all of the items on the agenda. So as we move on to other business, our next Transportation Commission meeting is June 30th at 7 p.m.
Fantastic. Do any commissioners have any other business for the good of the order? Anything from liaison positions or anything like that? Ms. Obukoya, I assume you haven't heard anything further about going back to in-person?
I understand that September is the tentative date, and I'm starting to prepare as if that is the date. So once I know for sure, I will let you guys know.
All righty. All right, seeing nothing else, I will go ahead and declare us adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys in a few weeks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.